The WNBA is facing one of its most intense moments yet, and this time, the controversy is going far beyond what happens between the lines. A new wave of debate has erupted around Sophie Cunningham, the league's position on transgender athletes, and what appears to be a growing divide between different voices inside women's basketball. According to the source material, the WNBA Players Association released a major statement addressing the controversy. The union emphasized values including justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion while strongly condemning hate, abuse, and demonization directed toward transgender people. But that statement has created even more questions. Because while the union is making its position clear, there are reports and suggestions that some people at the executive level may have sympathy with the concerns raised by Sophie Cunningham. And that is where this story becomes much bigger than one player or one statement. For weeks, fans have watched the debate grow. Some believe women's sports must maintain clear boundaries between men's and women's competition. Others argue that professional sports should create an environment where transgender athletes are treated fairly and included. Those two positions are now colliding inside one of the fastest-growing sports leagues in America. And caught in the middle of all of this is Caitlin Clark. Clark has become one of the biggest names in basketball, but she has generally tried to keep the attention on her performance rather than political or cultural arguments. Her three-point shooting, passing, competitiveness, and impact on the Indiana Fever have made her a superstar. But when a league becomes surrounded by controversy, staying outside the conversation becomes increasingly difficult. Every statement gets analyzed. And that is where this story becomes much bigger than one player or one statement. For weeks, fans have watched the debate grow. Some believe women's sports must maintain clear boundaries between men's and women's competition. Others argue that professional sports should create an environment where transgender athletes are treated fairly and included. Those two positions are now colliding inside one of the fastest-growing sports leagues in America. And caught in the middle of all of this is Caitlin Clark. Clark has become one of the biggest names in basketball, but she has generally tried to keep the attention on her performance rather than political or cultural arguments. Her three-point shooting, passing, competitiveness, and impact on the Indiana Fever have made her a superstar. But when a league becomes surrounded by controversy, staying outside the conversation becomes increasingly difficult. Every statement gets analyzed. Because the WNBA is growing rapidly, and with that growth comes a much larger audience with very different opinions. Some fans want basketball to remain the center of attention. Others believe the league's social positions are part of what makes it important. The question is whether the WNBA can satisfy both groups without losing the trust of either one. And just when it seemed this controversy couldn't get any more complicated, another incident involving an Indiana Fever game added another layer to the story. That balance is proving extremely difficult. Critics believe the league risks moving too far into political territory. Supporters believe the WNBA has a responsibility to stand against discrimination and protect marginalized people. And now Sophie Cunningham has become one of the most recognizable names connected to the other side of that argument. What happens next could have consequences well beyond one news cycle. Because the WNBA is growing rapidly, and with that growth comes a much larger audience with very different opinions. Some fans want basketball to remain the center of attention. Others believe the league's social positions are part of what makes it important. The question is whether the WNBA can satisfy both groups without losing the trust of either one. And just when it seemed this controversy couldn't get any more complicated, another incident involving an Indiana Fever game added another layer to the story. What initially appeared to be another major confrontation turned out to be far more complicated, and it highlighted just how quickly a moment inside the arena can become a national discussion once social media gets involved. The timing was particularly important. The WNBA is already dealing with intense debates over identity, inclusion, women's sports, and the direction of the league. So when security becomes involved during a game, fans immediately begin asking questions. What happened? Who was involved? Why did security react? Was someone actually violating the rules? And perhaps most importantly, was the original story accurate? The Fever statement attempted to provide clarity, but the controversy itself showed something larger. The environment around the WNBA has become extremely sensitive. A small interaction can suddenly become a major story. A comment can turn into a political debate. And a misunderstanding can spread across social media before the people involved even have an opportunity to explain what happened. That is especially significant for the Indiana Fever because Caitlin Clark has brought enormous attention to the franchise. Games involving Clark are watched by fans who have followed women's basketball for years, but also by millions of newer viewers who are discovering the league for the first time. Those new viewers are seeing not only the basketball, but also everything happening around it. And that creates a difficult challenge for the WNBA. The league wants to grow its audience while also addressing serious social issues. The Players Association says hateful behavior must be confronted. Critics argue that disagreement should not automatically be treated as hate. Supporters argue that protecting players and creating an inclusive environment is essential. Between those positions is a very difficult middle ground. And the debate involving Sophie Cunningham has made that middle ground even harder to find. The source material portrays the league as being at a crossroads, with different groups pushing it in different directions. One side wants stronger protection of transgender inclusion. Another side wants stronger protection of women's sports. And somewhere between those arguments are the players who simply want to compete. That tension is becoming impossible to ignore. The biggest question now is whether the WNBA can turn this conflict into a productive conversation, or whether the controversy will continue to overshadow the basketball itself. Part 3. For the WNBA, the biggest issue may not be what one player said or what one organization believes. The bigger question is what kind of league it wants to become. The source material describes a growing internal struggle between the league's progressive messaging and the concerns of people who believe women's sports should maintain traditional competitive boundaries. That debate is unlikely to disappear. In fact, it could become even louder. Caitlin Clark represents an important part of that future. Her arrival helped bring an enormous amount of attention to women's basketball. But that attention also means the league is now being watched by people who may not agree with its positions on social issues. Some viewers want nothing more than competitive basketball. Others expect the league to take strong positions on cultural issues. And many fans are somewhere in between. That creates a difficult balancing act. The WNBA Players Association has made it clear that it wants to protect players from abuse and discrimination. It has also called for fans to report hateful or abusive behavior online and in arenas. But the controversy surrounding Sophie Cunningham shows why the conversation is so complicated. If fans disagree with a league position, where is the line between legitimate criticism and hateful behavior? If someone supports Cunningham's concerns about women's sports, should that automatically be interpreted as hostility toward transgender people? Those questions are not easy to answer. And the league cannot avoid them simply by refusing to discuss them. At the same time, fans who feel their concerns are being dismissed may become increasingly frustrated. That is why the internal divide is so important. If executives and players are sending different signals, fans may struggle to understand what the league actually believes. The source material suggests that this tension could influence the WNBA's identity for years to come. One possible direction is a stronger emphasis on inclusion and transgender participation. Another is a renewed focus on traditional women's sports and the concerns raised by athletes such as Sophie Cunningham. And there is also the possibility that the league tries to find a middle ground. Whatever happens, the consequences will extend beyond one season. The WNBA is in a period of major growth, and growth brings opportunity, but it also brings risk. The more popular the league becomes, the more every controversy will be examined. Every statement will be clipped. Every incident will be debated. Every player reaction will be analyzed. That reality is already visible in the Indiana Fever fan incident. What began as a confusing moment during a game quickly became part of a much larger discussion about the relationship between players and fans. And that is exactly why the WNBA needs clarity. Fans deserve to know what the rules are. Players deserve to know they will be protected. And the league needs to make sure disagreement can exist without turning every conversation into another cultural battle. At the center of all of this is still basketball. That is what brought many of these fans to the WNBA in the first place. Caitlin Clark, Sophie Cunningham, and countless other players should ultimately be judged for what they do on the court. But the reality is that the conversation around women's sports has become much bigger than basketball. The WNBA now has a choice. It can allow the divisions to continue growing, or it can find a way to bring different sides into the same conversation. Because one thing is certain, this story is not finished. The debate over the future of women's sports, the league's policies, and the role of its players will continue. And the next statement, the next game, or the next unexpected moment could change the conversation all over again.